what excites me is the fact that we are truly moving towards a true global market where people get to play to their strengths in different regions of the world. We create this opportunity for everyone to participate and engage and look at it and regulate it based on all of the different end use approaches that exist for cannabis and hemp, instead of just being scared all the time that somebody might get high. And to me, that's really the opportunity. And I think we're moving in that direction. There's always going to be folks who are just tired and frustrated. I am tired and frustrated some days. I've been at this a long time, and to me, it just seems silly that we're still fighting some of these battles. However, if you look at the aggregate over the last decade, we have come a very long way. And so where we're going to be in another 10 years should be actually quite awesome.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cannabis Accounting Podcast. Today, I have with me my friend Chris Day, the co-founder of the Global Cannabis Network Collective, known as the GCNC. They're incorporated in Colorado, but as we'll explain, what does that mean for a digital company? I'll kick it over to you, Chris, to introduce yourself.
Hey, Raymond. Thanks so much for the invite. I'm excited to talk to you all that we've got on the agenda around global cannabis. And yeah, GCNC was founded now over 6 years ago by Jillian Redish and myself. And it is technically headquartered in Denver, but I tell people if you're going to work with the world, you got to be in it. And so we're very rarely at home. I actually base myself out of Mexico most of the time. And today alone, we've got team members going to Europe for ICBC next week. And we got some folks in the States. And of course, I'm hopping around Latin America a little bit right now before I go to Europe later in the summer.
Nice. In the cannabis industry, it's definitely becoming more global. And so, yeah, to be in the global cannabis industry, you got to be where it's going. So GCNC was founded 6 years ago. I'm a member of GCNC. I really enjoyed the group and kind of what you guys are building, but I'm relatively new in the grand scheme of things. So if we back up 6 years ago, can you tell me a little bit about what was the genesis of GCNC? What problem were you trying to solve that made you create it? Or even just...
Yeah, of course. There was a lot going on.
Imagine.
First of all, I was recruited into the cannabis industry by MJBiz. And so several years before that, they had brought me back to Colorado, thankfully, because that's where I was in Texas at the time, and was looking to get back to Colorado. So they brought me in to run the marketing and a lot of sort of some of the strategy and development at that point. When I was looking at the GCNC, though, it had been analyzing a lot about the industry movement, the growth of MJBizCon as a conference. And the gap I saw was this opportunity to create communication between international partners. We had in the States this problem of siloed conversations going on state by state. But as you looked abroad, you realize that same problem existed everywhere. Yeah, if there was a country that was operating, it was unlikely that they were talking to their neighbors. Certainly the companies that were trying to operate there had very little to pull on in terms of skill and conversation and understanding trends. And so several people have told me I was a little early, but the truth is, I think I was right on time, because we really caught the beginning of this discussion around what would a global cannabis industry look like, and how do we bring that conversation together so that there's top-to-top connectivity, so there's deal flow between countries and continents. Like, what kind of elements need to be created to do that? So the GCNC was built to facilitate that conversation and bring companies that are interested in that type of partnership together. And today we're boots on the ground in 25 different countries, 5 continents, and by extension, reach into a lot more.
No, for sure. And that is interesting, because I know what you're talking about like the siloed mentality of, as states were coming online, whether it was their medical programs, their adult use programs, many of them were, just almost trying to figure it out themselves. And so I can only imagine it's more pronounced when it's country to country. They might speak different languages, have different cultures, have different regulating bodies. And so, no, that definitely makes sense. And then knowing that the industry is still, it's just human and supply chain driven. It's like getting people to communicate is it's half the battle. Thinking that's a natural segue into another question I had about bottlenecks in like the global cannabis supply chains. Obviously, as new markets open up, sometimes it's domestic. The cannabis medical products or adult use products are cultivated domestically and manufactured and sold locally, which is like what we do in the United States. Every state, you got to grow it and sell it within the state. But in other countries, there's supply chains, and you could grow it in Canada, ship it into Portugal, and get it into other markets, or from Thailand into Germany. So it's happening a lot. So I guess, like, from your perspective, as the global supply chain starts to develop, what are some bottlenecks in the cannabis supply chain?
I think the largest bottlenecks that apply to everyone are typically legislative problems, overregulation, and the challenges of moving money, right? Which is always the case. Now, granted, the moving money challenge is vastly simpler if you link the United States out, because most of these federally regulated programs that exist in other countries are more realistic in how they view it, right? The other elements, I think, are often just a lack of understanding on the different frameworks. What does a medicinal framework in Europe look like, and what are the restrictions and requirements to produce in a situation like that versus, say, the US or even South America, right? If you're a Colombian producer and you're trying to ship into Peru, or you're trying to ship into Germany or elsewhere, the hoops that are required to get that first shipment done and really figure out how it all works is frequently the largest bottleneck. Once repetition is possible, that's great. But the other, I would say, is also identifying who your potential customers are. It's not like you can go to a master database somewhere and figure out who all the major players are. You got to do your homework. You got to frequently get on the ground, figure out who's real, who's not, and who you can trust. Is part of why we exist, right? Is to help facilitate that.
Yeah.
But we're there specifically to try to alleviate some of those bottlenecks and at least create the connectivity faster.
No, that makes sense, because it's such a complex thing trying to get just international business is just, it's fascinating, but it's complex, but that's what makes it interesting. And like, I have a minor in international business, and so it's so interesting. It's like a study in and of itself. And so it's really cool to see cannabis like step into that realm, because again, in the States, we just get in our own bubble of, if you're in Michigan, you grow it in Michigan, you turn it into a product, you sell it here. Maybe there's some MSOs and you get into other states, but there's no supply chain. Like, you're just battling it in these other markets piece by piece.
And that is actually one of the pieces that is going to make it very difficult for US players to participate long term if we don't get our act together quickly, I will add, because all of that isolationism within individual states creates a lack of vision on how that international commerce piece will work. There are exceptions. There are certainly people who are successfully participating in the global market. A year ago, I was at a rooftop party in New York, tied to a conference, talking to someone who claimed to have been in the cannabis industry for a very long time, who seemed to be unaware that there even was an international market. That is highly concerning. That's both a national problem and a business problem.
For sure. Candidly, I'm right there. Like, I was lucky where I started to date a Canadian, and she's a recruiter in the industry. But like, until then, I just lived in my own little world in the States, where it's like, all right, you have California, Colorado, they're like getting to go on. Oregon was a pretty solid market. Now we're starting to open up Michigan. But then you learn that it's there, it exists, and then it is growing. And so I'm disappointed, but not surprised in the individual.
Yeah.
Like, I was ignorant myself, but like, now I love it. And it's, oh no, this is going to become a thing. And so it is unique, where it does, like, it clouds our vision of what's possible as operators in the United States. It's like, we're just trying to figure it out here, where it's, I feel like in other markets, they can think more globally, where they're like, no, like, this is a logical supply chain. So yeah, I feel like it limits us quite a bit. And so some people are figuring it out, but most people aren't. It's not even on their radar.
Well, it's those light bulb moments, right? The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And so that is never-endingly true. And when it comes to understanding global business, I think, those who are in their individual markets, look, if your market is a specific town in Oklahoma and that's where you're at, that's cool. Then you should operate that way. But if you're selling large scale equipment or you have aspirations of creating a multinational trade route, that kind of thing, you really need to be paying attention to all of these different movements. And if you're the operator in Oklahoma who just wants to operate in Oklahoma, that's fine. But if you aren't acknowledging that there is actually a global market out there, as trade restrictions are lifted and opportunities arise, you're going to have a whole competitive set that you didn't even realize existed. And that's kind of part of when I talk in US markets and to US conferences, that's often part of my message, which is you can be comfortable at home. That's cool. Do it. But be aware, greater players are coming that are also going to want your market. And so make sure you shore it up. Keep your brand strong. Just be aware. Like any other industry, frankly, that exists.
Yep.
Cannabis is no different.
No, and it is interesting. I was just chuckling because everybody, or at least a lot of the operators I talked to, like no one's really concerned about a Canadian LP coming down and like getting their brand into the States. But it's like, yeah, that's a real thing. Like as soon as you can start to export, they can also export into here. And they also have economies of scale, and they've had a federally compliant system and framework to grow within, and access to capital markets that are a little bit more easy to go. No, be careful what you wish for, which is kind of a good segue into the next topic of who are some of these countries, that are involved in the global supply chain. So at a high level, could you just explain some of the new ones? We were talking off camera, how Africa is entering the space in a material way, where before it was just, the States, you had Canada, and you had UK/Germany. And it was like 4 countries that people were talking about, but let's say in the last 3 to 4 years, like that's changed. So who's involved?
Actually, it's always been more. It's just that US press didn't cover it. And so because of that, the awareness was super low. But what we were talking about before is if you look at the global dynamics of international trade for agricultural products in general, and you consider cannabis that as a root product, and then you look at all the different channels that comes up in, whether it's textiles or pharmaceuticals or food product, whatever that is, each region knows their area of expertise and is going to try to play in it. So one that I'm working on right now with member partners in the sub-Saharan region is certainly looking at South Africa and Lesotho, which people have been talking about for a number of years, but also this week I've been talking to folks about Botswana, because they have instituted a new program that they're bringing up. As you look at African nations that have regularly supplied products, for example, into Europe, and for the last several years, you've had South American countries trying to do that same thing. The natural flow of products in this category would be from Africa to Europe and from South America to North America. That's the traditional way of doing it. Since North America has been choked off, at least for the US piece, then a lot of the traditional stuff has been thrown out. You've got South America looking to Europe. If Africa rises up, what does that mean for the South Americans? It doesn't mean you're out. It just means it's a more complex market to look at. It creates great opportunities for countries like Mexico, where I spent a lot of time, and Canada can certainly take a leadership role in a lot of ways in that communication chain. But Africa is this highly developed continent that North Americans frequently ignore. Like the fact that we talk about the UK, Germany, and Africa.
Like it's its own country.
Think about it. It's absolutely not. And it's an ignorant position to take. And yet we all have done that at times. It'll be like US, Mexico, Canada, Germany, and South America. All right. Just think about that flow. So that's what I'm trying to do always, is figure out what those areas of opportunity are, like what's happening that is going to be a competitive strength for Argentina in the near future? How is Ecuador developing? What Peru made some great strides a couple of years ago. How are they continuing to develop that? The Brazilian market is over about 300 million people that for the most part has not been tapped internationally, but is a huge and growing opportunity. One of their biggest shows draws almost 70,000 people to it. Trade shows about cannabis and hemp. Like, it's an enormous market. Yes, it's an enormous market opportunity. We just added them to the GCNC event network this year. So these are regions and areas of opportunity that we're working on. So I can riff off the South American stuff because we've spent the last 2.5 years really digging into that. The African projects we've only been at for 6 months. And so we're really now starting to figure out who our partners are in those regions. Where is Morocco at? What's happening in Kenya? How is Botswana developing? How are South Africa and Lesotho going to continue to produce and frankly drop some of their regulations so that they can be more successful quicker? It's a very fun space to operate in, but it is highly complex. And as a company, you really have to do your due diligence to figure out, of all these opportunities, where can I make an impact and where can I find the best opportunity? Because if you try to tackle the entire globe, obviously it's both a very large and very small space all at once. But if you try and do it all too quick, you'll fail.
Yeah. You can't like boil the ocean. When you're thinking through some of these companies or countries and their various stages of medical cannabis or hemp products or adult use, I feel like there's the government side conversation of just getting it legalized, but then there's also just like the banking and business side of getting them on board. And so we had talked a little bit about, for sure in the US, there's many banks that don't serve the industry. It's still federally illegal. So we have this weird situation we deal with stateside of who are the banks getting involved, which also invest capital, it impacts capital and people's desire to want to invest. And so I think, so like from that perspective, what are your thoughts on the countries that are, like to your point, moving money amongst them? Who are the banks that are working with them, and how should investors think through the risk of investing in some of these newer countries?
Yeah, frankly, most of the countries that have legalized programs have legalized banking. It's not right. That's
a stupid question, right? They've legalized.
But so it's just not the same. I think if you look at first, the challenge then comes if you're trying to move money in and out of the United States for some reason, or if a bank is specifically tied to it, you've got to do your due diligence to make sure that they aren't going to be so beholden to US banking regulations that for some reason they see you as a high risk. But the truth is, the further abroad you get, the less important that is. The United States financial institutions and governmental structure as it relates to banking around cannabis, those policies are undermining our nation's ability to compete long term. That's the US is not waiting. The world is not waiting for the US. They are moving, they are making money, they are making products, they're plugging this into medicinal programs. And the longer the United States waits, the further behind and the less relevant we become as a nation. And that is an extension, frankly, that goes into a lot of policies for the US government, but we'll stay away from those. I will say that most of the banks and credit unions that I see participating in the US are ones that are smaller, more locally minded, and thus have typically an attitude of service to the community. Like they're there because their banking institution needs to make money, but it's also community based. And so it's there to serve the community. If you look at the behemoth banking institutions in the US, most of them, frankly, are cowards and financial opportunists. All they care about is adding some fees, making some additional margin on whatever loan. And if they're worried at all about that, they just aren't going to participate because they do not care about the communities in general or their customers. You're a number on a spreadsheet. So until that shifts, that will be the case. I keep preaching to mid-size and smaller banking institutions in the US that there is an opportunity for someone to stand up and really make an impact and a difference in a way that I think the business community in cannabis could embrace, but they have to be willing to talk about it publicly and market publicly and ultimately lend money. Because everybody's happy to take deposits. Very few are happy to actually create the business tools that most of us are used to in other industries.
Yeah, you clearly have spent some time in the cannabis banking conversation space. That's just like, oh yeah, we'll take your money, but no, like other things, like no, we can't process payments, you can't loan, no lines of credit. You're like, what are we doing here?
In a past life, I had several major banking institutions as clients or agencies that I worked for. I actually know the ins and outs of that really well, and I understand why they're being cowards, but somebody needs to suck it up.
Yeah. No, I remember it had to be 3 or 4 years ago. I was flown out to Detroit to talk to a bankers. It was like a small credit union that had like 9 locations around the metro Detroit area. And it was just really interesting. I was like confused. I was like, you guys want to know about the cannabis industry? Like, it's been legal in your state for a decade. And their questions were like, just like you were saying, like very, very concerned about the industry, the risk. What are they taking on? AKA, what are they getting versus the risk that they're taking on? Like, how much money can they make? And you're still like kind of to your education piece at the beginning. Like, it's not just educating the end consumer, you're also educating people a part of the supply chain almost. We need banks to do business. Like, I need a commercial bank account. And so it's been interesting where it's like in other industries, you just open one, where in cannabis, you're like, okay, I got to go talk to their board of directors, try to convince this local bank that it's okay. And then once they are in cannabis, then I can use them. No, it's very interesting.
Yeah, and banks and many businesses and consumers who work with banks forget that our assets are the bank's liabilities and our liabilities are the bank's assets. And so if they can't figure out how to make money off of us in a way that they see very low risk but high margin, like they're not going to do it. And more community-minded companies, community-minded banks and credit unions are going to have a slightly different calculus. The goal is still the same, but it's a slightly different calculus on risk tolerance frequently and the ability to mitigate risk because you're in the market, you're local, and you can have a closer watch on who you're working with.
No, that makes sense. I got a question because I guess I know you're involved in all this. I guess like from the United States perspective and rescheduling, I'll just ask, do you think it's actually going to happen in 2026 or 2027? Or do you think it's like just TBD, doesn't really matter?
Who knows? We got to stop fighting wars in other parts of the world and focus on domestic policy. If we can do that, maybe. But at the moment, the goal seems to be to create a new crisis every week. And I don't think
it seems it's like, I'm just trying to run a business.
Yeah.
This doesn't help.
So I think those types of just insane distractions that have to be resolved in order to do business anywhere need to be taken care of first. I don't see under the current manic approach that the administration is taking any likelihood that they will actually push it through. I want to be wrong. It certainly could happen, but it doesn't seem like a big enough headline grabber at the moment to surface to the top of the administration's priorities. If it's not a big headline, it doesn't seem to happen. So,
man, and I've given up on being surprised. Like, I remember thinking like, oh man, December, this is going to be the biggest thing that's going to be talked about for a few months. And then like Venezuela, then Iran. I'm like, oh my God, like I'm just trying to, like, we were so close. Like we were the most important topic for a day. It's like, oh, man, dang, now back to the bottom again.
But that's the attention span of the American news cycle. And whether for good or ill, all of the stuff that we are extraordinarily concerned about right now may very well be off the news cycle within a couple of months. Neither you nor I, nor frankly anybody in the administration, I don't think actually knows. And so if that happens and they're looking around for something to put into a headline, yeah, it could actually move forward. There's other things behind the scenes that need to happen on the Hill and elsewhere in order to make that happen. So it's not all up to, say, the White House. And I think we've
That
got
makes sense.
several months worth of other stuff that has to be happening in the background in order to make it feasible. But yeah, it's highly unlikely it happens this year.
Alrighty, awesome. You heard it here first. No, I'm just kidding. But
They heard that a lot. Everybody's seen that a lot.
I know. Switching gears a little bit back to ICBC, because I know GCNC is going to be hosting a gathering over there. Jillian's going to be over there. This is going to be my first time at the ICBC Berlin event. But could you just tell people a little bit about what are your goals next week with the GCNC going over to Berlin? And for those that don't know, just what to expect.
Yeah, this will be the first year that I'm not physically there, and at least seven. But in general, I find ICBC interesting because it attracts a lot of folks from North America who are interested in interacting in the European markets. And it attracts many people from Europe who are actually operating there. I see it as an education opportunity for North American companies in particular, to get an overview of what is happening within the European markets. I will say that because it's in Berlin and Germany is the shiny object of the moment, it skews heavily towards what is happening in Germany, how is that moving forward. But when you're there, I'd advise also listen for what's going on in France, because there's a lot of building opportunity there. Look at what's happening in Italy, because it's a little bit further back, but that is also developing. If you add France and Italy to that market at any scale, it becomes even larger than we're already familiar with. Czech Republic, Poland, Macedonia, all of these markets have programs that are active and running. Greece is up and coming. I was talking to somebody who's one of the operators in Greece right now. They have 4 strains. They're looking for genetic diversification. They're starting to build into, this medical program. So there's so much going on there. I always encourage people go certainly hear about what's happening in Germany. It is currently the anchor on the continent, but don't lose sight of the fact that the EU moves as a block economically, and that is what is happening. And of course, the UK has their own thing going, and once they figure out how to not scare doctors off from writing prescriptions, it'll grow a lot faster. But it is continuing to grow, and also it's another anchor country. Yeah.
No, that's really cool. And that's what I'm going there for next week, is learn as much as I can, meet network with new people, new players, about new people in the supply chain, but also meet old friends, old people in the supply chain. Because at this point, it's like it has been around for many years. It's coming up on 5+ years in many places where they've been operating a supply chain. And like I said, I minored in international business, so like I like it, and so it's cool to see these new countries come online, and that there is always that like new enthusiasm that comes along with it. It's still a lot of work, but there's always like enthusiasm around new ones, and I like that energy. But that's why I like the cannabis industry. It's a startup industry that's like coming out of prohibition.
Yes, yeah, and a lot of Germany's way past. It's funny. I was talking to some U.S. operators the other day who had decided that they were going to go to ICBC because of the new markets abroad. And I was like, define new markets, because frankly, Germany's bad at this and has a much more robust system than a lot of the newer states. And so it's always an opportunity to educate and learn, but also recognize the fact that while you may not have heard about it, or people in general may not have heard about it, the truth is all of these things have been moving for quite a while. And so you're plugging in now. You're not an early adopter anymore. You're plugging into an operating program and hopefully providing value add, as opposed to just trying to leech off the system.
That's what I think through too. It's because I have similar conversations, and having visited it just over there, like 99% of our business is in the States. We have 1 Canadian client. So I'm like, okay, I'm starting to get exposure to it. But yeah, it's like people, they think there's like just, the new market, the global markets, like it's one market. And I'm like, dude, there's like Canada, there's the UK, there's Germany, there's Portugal, there's they're all kind of like how states have every market's its own thing. The same thing.
Yep.
And to your point, there's competition. Like just because you were a big name in California or Colorado or you're an MSO that's been around, it's like you need to go there and win the business against somebody that's already been trying to win the business and establish relationships and supply chains. And like we've talked about before, like you can't buy your way into everything.
No,
Everybody
and
thinks they can.
I will also say that, yeah, not only can you not buy your way into everything, but there is a fair amount of cultural adaptation that needs to occur, especially if you're coming out of the US market. The perception that exists in general terms around US operators is not always positive.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks come in just assuming that because they're from California, they're going to get a reception with open arms. Whereas in fact, you may have to overcome some challenges to prove that you can participate without looking like an idiot, because cultures are different and business operations are different. And you have to adjust to them, not the other way around.
That's good advice for sure. And because, yeah, everybody's like thinking very emotionally intelligent, but I think every once in a while we need to remind people that, like, no, like that people, they might think California wheat's great, but they don't think you and your company are great. And, yeah.
And they certainly don't know if they're going to trust you on running a business. Frankly, a lot of the lessons learned abroad as markets have been structured have been learned based on what the US did and screwed up that we don't want to repeat. Right. And so people do pay attention. They do learn from experience. And there are some great things that they've learned, but there's also a lot of things where you go, oh, don't want to create that problem. Let's avoid that. And so if you come in and you don't have that situational awareness, I'm sure you'll have a very nice time and people will treat you politely and you'll have some good drinks or whatever, but you won't want to win the business.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Because it is interesting, like, because even in the States, like, they are getting better. Like, everybody complains about every state, and don't get me wrong, nobody's got it perfect. But I like to think they're getting slightly better as they open up more adult use markets. Like, the first 20 were chaos. The last 5 adult use markets had a little bit more of, like, foresight, or they were at least trying to address certain things.
Right.
Yeah, they didn't address it perfectly, but they tried to. I know, like in New York, they tried to do a better job of like actually funding some of the social equity licenses. Like, whether it actually came to fruition, but they realized they're like, okay, we can't just give people licenses with no means to make it profitable. But so they,
yeah, and look, there is no perfect global market either. If you look under the hood at what's going on in Germany, right, it's been a lot of 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of stuff. France did their pilot programs for 4 years. They were successful. It went well, but why? You already knew how they were going to turn out. These things have been duplicated in other places. So nobody's perfect by any means. We just all have to go into it with open eyes and realize that and this is a people business and we're working with individuals.
yeah, and it's policy heavy. Like I'm coming to accept that more and more. It's just part of the industry. It's like there's going to be lobbying. You're going to have to talk to politicians and people on the regulatory side. It's just part of this industry. It's a new industry. And I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense. I remember when you used to have to go inside a bank, and I'm like, all right, like banks didn't used to be online. And so that was like a whole thing too, where people had to learn how to like use that and lobby for it. And so cannabis is going to be more of the same. I know you're a busy man, Chris, and it's probably going to be a beautiful sunset down there in Mexico. So I want to get you out of here, but just last few questions. Looking forward to the next 1 to 3 years. What has you concerned about the cannabis industry? And then to end on a high note, what has you optimistic or excited about the cannabis industry's next 1 to 3 years?
Honestly, when it comes to concerns, it's more of just a question, which is how long is it going to take for adoption to really occur in some of the more challenging markets, and the most challenging being the US. It doesn't scare me because the way I look at it is if you're operating in a global sense, there's always somebody moving forward. There's always somebody in the middle, and there's always somebody taking 5 steps back for no apparent reason, but they choose to do it, right? If you're in that market, it's painful. if you've diversified across multiple markets and you've got some in each bucket, it's like a mutual fund in that sense. You are operating where you can and trying to mitigate risk in others. So that to me is the long view when it comes to cannabis. What excites me is the fact that we are truly moving towards a true global market where people get to play to their strengths in different regions of the world. We create this opportunity for everyone to participate and engage and look at it and regulate it based on all of the different end use approaches that exist for cannabis and hemp, instead of just being scared all the time that somebody might get high. And that's, to me, that's really the opportunity. And I think we're moving in that direction. There's always going to be folks who are just tired and frustrated. I am tired and frustrated some days. I've been at this a long time. And to me, it just seems silly that we're still fighting some of these battles. However, if you look at the aggregate over the last decade, we have come a very long way. And so where we're going to be in another 10 years should be actually quite awesome.
No, that's for sure. It's interesting, right? It's, if you've seen the last 10 years and you're like tired and getting out, it's like, we've accomplished so much. Imagine what the next 10 years will look like. And it's not only new markets, it's like the markets we're already in. There's still so much room to grow. Like I think of the States where it's like, dude, we're still federally illegal. Like we have half the United States that don't even have legal cannabis. So there's much to do. So no, I'm excited for the next 10 years. And I also think it's really cool to see the global market develop and people start to play to their strengths instead of trying to be everything to everyone. And I didn't like vertical integration. Like I get it, but like Heinz ketchup doesn't grow the tomatoes and then make it all the way into their ketchup. And yeah,
it doesn't work and it never will. We're outside of very focused craft products, which perhaps that's an example, but that's not how business works. It's not how industry works. And it will not serve markets to start out that way. And nobody is. At this point, there is almost nobody who is launching a new cannabis market around the world with vertical integration in mind, because frankly, it's dumb. So
do it too. We're just like, no, that's clearly the best way to do it. So that's why I like global perspective, because it forces you to take a step back of, hey, like this works in this specific situation, in this specific country, in this state, in this market, but doesn't mean that's the end all be all. No, that's
right. And if that's what you have to, by the way, I should state, if that's what you have to work with, it's because that's what you're given and you're doing it awesome. I'm cheering for you and you have to do it to play, and I get it. But if you have the choice, there is never an advantage to not playing off of your skill sets and then combining it with other people's skill sets who are better at those things than you are. Like that's just how it works. So yeah, I tend to say very emphatic statements very directly, like vertical integration is dumb, but if that's what you have to work with, you should do it and participate and do it as best as you can. So
no, we'll caveat that. No worries. No.
Yeah, just get it in.
You're operating with our constraints as well in the States. And everybody's got limited resources. The grass isn't always greener in every other country. So no, that was a good perspective. Again, Chris, we could talk all day about this. Thanks again for your time. Sure, I'll see you.
Pleasure.
And bye-bye.
All right, you too. Thanks. Bye.